anything like that. We just talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so, like, I was having a conversation recently with a friend, and we was talking about just some of the behaviors that you have later on in life that you don't really know how to get away from. You don't really know where they started, where you influenced to pick them up. I think naturally when we're around different people, anyways, you just naturally start to share and emulate some behaviors and mannerisms, even if it's a small scale, large scale. It just tends to happen organically. But I don't think that we take the advantage to go back and actually like study and analyze our parents,
Mhm.
people who had their hands on molding us, to identify like, okay, well, there's some ways that I can't really seem to get away from. It may not be serving me the best that I feel like it should be. Where did I get this from? A lot of times we wear it like a badge, like, no, I'm just this, I'm just that, I'm not this, I'm not that. It's like, do you want to be?
Good point.
And if you want to be, cool. But if you don't want to be, you don't have to wear that jersey. You know what I mean? You can get in the transfer portal. You can go and grow and develop yourself away from some of those behaviors and mannerisms that you know aren't necessarily that favorable because you came up under it and you witnessed it. And I think this is not a negative conversation towards how we were raised or how we were brought up by any means. It's just more of an awareness of, okay, these are the great things, but then these are also some things I probably picked up,
Yeah.
and probably
Completely
would serve me if I, what I mean, I understood it a little bit more, and could maybe adjust it,
yeah,
and optimize it, maybe maximize it versus just endure, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, you said a bunch of important points. You said uniform, and again, also about which are the ones that are working for us and which aren't, which are serving us and which aren't serving us. Mm-hmm. How many times have we been around someone like, well, you know what, that person is from New York. Yep. That person is from the South, mm-hmm. right? Like, well, that's the way we do things in the South. So what does that mean? That means that based on the culture you grew up in, there's a certain programming that you were exposed to. And that programming gave you a certain set of behaviors of how you react and respond to certain things. But you said something that is ridiculously important, which is when do you get to a certain point in your life where you can have enough discernment to be able to say, this programming is or isn't working for me, right? That's the biggest thing, right? What programming do I have? Taking the time to realize why, and then figuring out how can I reprogram my mind. So completely, I mean, how many times have you been to like sports, right? And this might offend some people out there, but Philadelphia isn't really known for having the best sports fans, right? And certain places you go, so you end up getting into these mob mentalities and the way people behave based on based on where they're from, because it's the culture that they grew up in which gave them the program. And rightfully so. Look, I grew up in New York City, and it was a certain environment that was the normal way to behave in certain situations. Now you take that and you put it into other environments. It may not necessarily mesh, but the biggest question is not about saying what's right or wrong in behavior, not about saying what's right or wrong in programming, not about saying what's right or wrong in the responses. The question is, where do you want to go? And is that programming helping you or hindering you to get to where you need to go? Right? Personally, I could talk about 100 different times about needing to look at the programming I had. I can look back now and look at some poor decisions I made along the way. My 20s was full of poor decisions. I don't like using good or bad because that's always in the eye of the beholder, right? But if we look at it from a spectrum and say, well, wait a second, why were a certain number of decisions that I made poor decisions? And maybe it was because I didn't get enough discernment. I didn't have enough good decision makers around me to help me be able to make good decisions down the road. So, completely agree. There's a great book that I'm reading right now, which is called "What to Say When You Talk to Yourself," and it's an unbelievable. It's this little book. It is one of the most powerful books I've read in the last 5 years easily, because a lot of it has to do with steering us away from this idea of needing motivation, needing inspiration, needing a why. What's your why, right? We can go so far down that path from an understanding of what we should be doing. But the programming comes down to one thing: self-talk, right? There's a video that you've seen, I'm sure 1,000 times, of Mayweather running.
Oh, yeah.
One man army. one man army,
Mm-hmm.
one man army, self-talk. Cristiano Ronaldo, any of these great achievers, right? I don't like using the word success. Success is too mundane, right? It's too vague.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's
too vague.
relative.
It's relative, exactly.
Yeah.
But if we can say high achievers, and something that now I realize after, never really putting two and two together, one thing that they all share is ridiculous amounts of high-level self-talk
Mm-hmm.
versus being reactive, being responsive, versus the New York City that I grew up in, right? Where a lot of it was reactivity based on the environment. And if you become reactive to your environment, who's running the show? You or the environment, right? So, great book, small coffee tables. Actually, no, it's a little pocket book. And all it's about is how do you develop that self-talk? And it breaks it down into 5 levels of self-talk, which is the first, which is the negative things about ourselves, which we're all guilty of, right? We're all guilty.
And that's your immediate go-to is
Yeah.
negative.
Why?
Right.
The question is why?
Yeah.
Because that's what we're
Programmed
programmed
to do.
to do. Because we were around people that spoke that way.
Right.
Right? We were young people that maybe projected that on us.
Right.
To no fault of their own. They
Right.
just did. And the second level is the not version, right? Where you say, instead of like, oh, well, I can't quit smoking, versus like, I'm not a smoker, right? Where you can kind of get the negative version of it, but you're still talking in negative terms.
You're still attracting the negative because you're putting it, even though you don't want something, if you're putting out what you don't want, you still attract it.
Correct. And that exact point is exactly how I feel. Have you ever seen the evil eye, the blue evil eye that people wear? I actually think that's bad luck. I think that's bad luck. But it goes back into what you just said. It's evil.
Right.
You're wearing something that's evil based. I want to wear an angel eye.
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, why not?
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to attract something, like if I see that and it's like the evil eye, I'm like, why are you wearing the evil eye? To me, it does the reverse. In the same way that what we were just saying doesn't reverse.
Right.
Because you're still saying it in negative terms. Versus if you wore a little thing that said, this is a blessing eye.
But
And all of a sudden blessings come.
from a cultural standpoint, like where that originates from, it's the opposite.
I
And
understand.
that's how it's programmed,
And that's
what
the thing.
people are programmed to do.
And the thing is that culture isn't right or wrong, it just is.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, culture just is.
Right.
But then the question is that what parts of culture do you want to embrace? And what do you want to politely push aside?
100%.
Right? If I grew up in a culture and the vast majority of the people in my culture are vastly overweight because of the diet of our culture,
Right.
I'm going to push that away. And I'm going to not accept that and say, I understand you grew up in Memphis, but it doesn't mean you need to have fried chicken every night. Might not be productive to where you want to go and who you want to become. But that's a tougher conversation for people to have because they need to look deep in the mirror.
Well, and it's also, and I think it's even tougher because it's more broad too. It's not always just necessarily where you're from. It's socioeconomic status. It's what you have access to. It's what you can afford. You know what I mean? Our country is designed to make crap food cheap, and healthy food is more expensive. So it's not always just about a mentality. You're not always just about this is how I was raised. It's now what access you have.
And so much of it has to do with supply and demand.
Yeah.
Right? Because, we live in an era where capitalism built this country, but I think there's something different, which is consumerism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Capitalism is the greatest system in the world to be able to create free societies. Capitalism built that. Right? And that goes back to the Greeks and the Romans. Capitalism is good. Consumerism is slippery slope. Right?
Yeah.
Slippery slope. Because as consumers, then it becomes about mass consumption, which then leads to the G word of greed.
I say it's more want-based
Right.
versus need-based.
Right. So I think that's what people should be more leery of, right? Where it's sort of saying, we understand that we live in a consumerism society. Capitalism is a great thing. Capitalism in this country gives everyone the opportunity to start or run a business, right? To be able to sell products, do whatever they want. The system itself is good. What ends up happening is whether or not greed can take over and people start to take advantage of consumerism. That's a whole nother ballgame when it comes to consumerism.
And I think we're deep into that right now as a society.
And it's probably something that will be around. It's been around since the dawn of human time. It will be around forever.
Right.
The question is whether or not we're training ourselves and our family and our children against the 7 deadly sins,
Yeah.
one of them being greed.
Right.
That's the line.
Well, it's greed and gluttony.
Greed and gluttony.
And consumerism covers both of
100%. 100%. And if you can get in the pride and vanity, right? Sell to vanity, right? It's like if you wanna sell to women, sell to beauty. You wanna sell to men, sell to access to women or wealth, which in their mind calculates access to women, right? That's the best way to sell, to get into that idea of consumerism. And if you can tap into that primal nature, then you can sell anything and people will consume just about everything.
Oh
You know?
And I think going back, just to like what you originally said, I just have like a little tidbit, and I think it's probably self-awareness and figuring out what you want to do.
Yeah.
Like growing up, love my family to death, but I always struggled with feeling like I'm good enough, no matter what it was. Good enough athlete, good enough student, good enough daughter, good enough mother, whatever it is. I've always struggled with feeling like I'm good enough. I know that goes back to that. My family has always been, as well, very passive aggressive, which also caused defensive reactions. So recently, well, not so recently, 3 years ago, Jalen and I, my son, we were in the car, and I was on the phone with someone in my family, I don't remember who it was, and I got super frustrated because they were being very, very passive aggressive, and I tend to think I'm much more blunt and direct because I'm aware of what passive aggressive is and what it does, and I don't like it. And so I was kind of venting to Jalen, and I was like, I'm so frustrated, like my family's so passive aggressive, I just don't understand why we can't address this issue. And Jalen looks at me, he's like, Mom, you're passive aggressive too. And I was like, my first reaction was to get very, very defensive.
Right.
And I was like, but then I was like, knowing the source who's telling me something about myself, my son has no reason to try and hurt me or cut me or tell me I'm not good enough.
Right.
So then taking a minute to reflect on that, be like, shit, maybe I'm a little passive aggressive. And since that moment, I've been much more aware. And it's funny, the systems that built us, which are family, can also be the systems that help us undo that. Jalen is my family. It's another sense of family that's helping me undo some of those systems and some of those processes.
Well, you just said, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
No.
I was just gonna say, it's just being, it's not just like, do we want to change? It's being self-aware enough to own our bullshit.
Oh yeah.
And know how we need to change.
And there's three things that you just completely nailed. One is that whatever bothers us most in other people,
We have it. Yeah.
that's completely number one.
Yeah.
That's what I call mirror moments.
Yeah.
It's a mirror moment.
Right.
Like, hey, how you feeling? Feel like a mirror moment to you? Oh, does this bother you? And sometimes, like, I'll intentionally act a certain way towards someone, knowing that that's the way they're acting towards you. And then all of a sudden, you can see it raised in them, and you're just looking at them like, gotcha. Yeah. You're like, you see how that feels? You don't like that, did you?
Right.
So you probably shouldn't do it. Right? And you can kind of understand that. But again, coming back to the self-awareness is huge. And then you being able to open up about your family, that is 1,000% exactly what Alex said, which was the program. Yeah. And whether you knew it or not, you were programmed and they were programmed. And there's something about who you were that caused them to project this passive aggressiveness on you. And a lot of it has to do with control. I think passive aggressiveness stems vast majority from control. And the fact that once you get to a certain point of power and people don't have a certain power over you, you can either use aggression or you can use passive aggression. But the vast majority of people don't have that aggressive side. I've been accused of being a very aggressive person, right? Because I fight passive aggressive with aggressive. Because if someone's going to communicate with me in a passive aggressive way, I'm going to go back to the way I believe we should communicate, which is aggressive, and just say, this is what I think. This is what I'm going to say. Don't speak to me like that, which then also goes back to the other book, which is then the side of self-talk.
Do you think
And
that's
that's the challenge.
or is that more assertive?
Well, again, I think it's the same side of the coin,
Right.
right? I think it's levels, right? So it's like everything is just levels. I feel like saying it like that. Levels. Everything is, and Alex has heard me say that this 1,000 times, which is just spectrum.
Yeah.
Everything is a spectrum, and it's timidity versus
Ultra.
right,
Yeah.
aggressiveness. And a lot of times what happens is that I tend to look at that spectrum almost like a circle. And what I mean by that is that sometimes the people that are most timid are the most weak, but sometimes the people that are the most aggressive are the most weak.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
100%.
Right?
100%.
So it's
Especially,
like if you see someone that's being overly aggressive, they're usually the weakest.
they're overcompensating.
And someone being overly timid is the weakest. So it's a spectrum, but it's a circle.
Right.
right? It's very interesting. Something that, that I've found is that even if you look at the left and the right from a political perspective, the far left and the far right almost meet. It's wild.
Yeah.
It's like, it's wild. Like they both hate the government. They both, like, hate everyone in authority. And you're like, you realize you guys are kind of friends, right? Like it's weird, but you made it around because you both hate the same stuff.
Right.
It's interesting. So, what I found is that the idea of the heart is the spectrum. It does come back around, but is what level are you want at that given moment. And then the other thing, I'll go back to what you were saying before, is that I think that there's a misconception of the idea of becoming defensive. Here's what I mean. We've been shamed and told that it's bad. Oh, you're becoming defensive.
Yeah.
So that's actually a judging negative statement, right? So that person is judging you and shaming you. You're doing this.
Right.
What I would argue to that is it's defending yourself. So if you're going to wag your finger at me because you're saying I'm being defensive, I would just shoot back and say, is your behavior causing me to defend myself? Right. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%.
So I don't necessarily look at this idea of this blanket statement of like, oh, you got to be careful. They're going to get defensive. Right. Why would that be a bad thing?
Well, and it is that it's like, so we're supposed to then, if that's the case, if we're not supposed to be defensive or defend ourselves, we're supposed to just let anybody say anything to us at any time, but we can't say anything, or if we say anything, well, then we're just feeding into their hand.
Well, that goes back to timidity,
Yeah.
and that goes back to power. Right. Everything is about power. As much as people want to admit it or don't admit it.
I hate, so
things are about power.
I don't know if Frank Underwood line on House of Cards. That's the one thing that's always stuck with me from that show. Other than
He has a line.
The line is everything is about sex except for sex. It's about power.
Okay.
Yeah. Or no, yeah, something about that.
Okay.
But yeah. But it just or everything is about power. No, yeah, something like that.
Everything's about sex.
Except sex.
Except for sex.
Sex is about power.
Sex is about power. I definitely can see how the inspiration behind a lot of the things that we chase in the world are behind that sexual energy of obtaining it. And then you asked earlier, why? Why are we obtaining this? Why is it enticing to be a successful human? Right? What are you looking to obtain? Why are you trying to be more attractive?
Yeah.
What's the deep base foundation? Right, meaning. So no, that's a great point. I think that defensive part, definitely. I mean, you don't want to be timid. You don't want to have just no type of standards as far as what you accept and don't accept. And I think it brought to my mind boundaries. Right. Mm-hmm. I think it's necessary to understand what are the appropriate boundaries for yourself. That way, you will show people how to respect you by the way in which you respect yourself. But I think that even goes all the way back to the foundational points of that internal foundational programming. I think that definitely influences the boundaries that we set for ourselves. Some may be a little bit, misled, depending on some of those, I guess, influences that we have that we necessarily don't agree with. Yeah. Like, well, why am I so quick? Yeah. Why am I so quick on this subject? Yeah. Why do I get rattled so fast on this subject? And it might not be the subject. It might be the level of rattling and the intensity that comes behind it because it's triggering up something else unrelated. And so I think it's good to have the right boundaries, and then once you have the appropriate healthy boundaries for yourself and self-respect, then stand on them and don't let nobody, kind of cross and you be defensive on that. But no, I was just going back to some of the points.
Yeah. It adds to reactivity. Right. And to answer your point real quick, when you said rattle, the whole idea is I think when people claim about being defensive, what they're really saying is you're being reactive. Right? So what's the reactivity to it? So I think it's the wrong word. Right. So I think if they're saying, well, this person gets defensive, they're defending themselves. But I think if you switch out the word and say you got to be careful, they get very reactive when you have those conversations. So one thing that I've worked on for the last couple of years has been the reactivity side of things. And sometimes my response is nothing at all. Mm-hmm. And when my response is nothing at all, that's also a way of defending yourself. You see what I'm saying?
That's usually the most dangerous response. For someone like me, that's a dangerous response.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm at that point,
right. Now the question is that when can you use that in other situations, right? Because at that point, what you're doing is you're taking away the only thing that you have freebie to give, which is your attention. And if you're saying to that person, I'm not going to respond to that, they're either going to learn from that experience or they're just going to, back away, which teaches people how to treat you, right? Having boundaries. You see me do this 100 times with people, right? And sometimes if I'm just getting quiet, I'll defend myself and I won't be reactive. But there are times when I still do get reactive. And then those that know me well can see it in my eye. You know what I mean? Like they'd be like, you were holding there for a second, right? You got a little bit reactive. I saw it in you. You wanted to punch him in the face, didn't you? I'm like, I did.
Yeah.
Did I show it? And you're like, you did. But I saw it because I know you. You know what I mean? And I'm like, damn it. I need to control it a little bit more, which goes back to the reactivity, which lies deeper into why those things cause us to react, which goes back to growing up, which goes back to our environment, which goes back to our programming that says, all right, I can admit that when someone brushes past this broken rib that I have, that I never healed from childhood, it makes me do that when all they were trying to do was hug me. But what ends up happening is that they're hitting a broken rib.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That's a good point, and it causes a different reaction. It's almost like engaging in the game, right? You can see, but I don't have to saw. But the moment that you're seeing, you're sawing, now we're playing this game, and that's that pause, moment that I've heard about. Like when somebody comes with you with negative energy, just out of the left field, just take a minute to just kind of pause and let that moment settle. And it almost gives the person an opportunity to face themselves. Because now they have to, the silence allows them to be accountable for the action they just did before you engage in the game. Because as soon as you engage in the game, you let them off the hook. Because now they're just a reaction game. You act, I react, you act, I react, I did this, and you swung back, and so now we fight. Right? Versus they swing and you start to.
And sometimes they're getting exactly what they want, which is a reaction.
Yeah, and
so you're actually rewarding them.
You just look at it. Then they realize, oh, I just swung. Why did I just swing at this person? Because they're not coming back at me. So now it gives a person a moment of accountability. Like, it's interesting when you apply that. I've only done it one time. Somebody approached me sideways in the gym on some left field stuff. I just kind of looked at him in the eyes. It's like, it's quiet. And it was awkward. It was awkward. I don't respond calmly. Right. And then later they come to apologize. It's like, I was like, that's how that works. But it's tough in that moment. Put that, that fire aside.
Depending on the environment, it can happen more or less often. And also depending on who we are. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, I've had that happen a ton of times to me. Sometimes people think that they could check me. A lot of it has to do with human nature. You know what I mean? They see a big guy like this. They don't push quite as much. I tell my big, my buddies who are big and muscular guys, they don't deal with some of the sideways stuff I do. Right. And then they look at me and be like, hey man, like why'd you, respond like that? I'm like, you don't know what it's like. No man, I get pressed. 5'10", 180. I'm gonna get pressed if you're 6'2", 220. You're not gonna get pressed at certain times that I get pressed. Right. And I do the quiet thing sometimes too, but it's hard, it's challenging. To be able to do that, to not be reactive to situations. And then realize also is that sometimes if we do react, it can either be good or bad. One could be like the bro is slapping you on the back and it hits that broken rib that you got and you're responding to it. Or it could just be someone that's genuinely trying to hug you and love you. And it's hitting that broken rib. Yeah, and that's the whole idea of that. We all got a bunch of broken shit inside of us. It is what it is. But the whole reason for broke is that it can be fixed.
They got that new word, trigger man.
Right. And if it's broken, it can be fixed. But if it's just bad, it's just bad. And that goes back to the programming for the family, unfortunately.
And the intent could be good. I know you got a point. I'm gonna stop making it. The intent can be really good. I think that's powerful about the point you're making right now. Is the intention could be really good, but they still hit that red. They still hit that trigger point. And I think a lot of times we all probably can attest to the fact that we might flash on somebody who meant well, but they just didn't know us.
And then we gotta come back.
Right. They stepped on that nerve. They triggered that point. That the pops used to do with the mom, the sibling. That you know what I mean. It just. And then you go and you're like, oh, what was that?
Yeah.
What was that? But that's the beauty of wisdom, right? We can take those moments, and if we hold ourselves accountable, and I think that was the foundation. The thing we broke it all in is like the outcome, accountability, and then the outcome. It's like, why is it important to hold yourself accountable? Because what do you want as your outcome for life? I know you wanted to make that.
No. The only thing I'm gonna say was just going back to boundaries is like, and this is something I'm very guilty of too. Is like we have certain boundaries and stuff in place, and it's important. Yep. And then someone will come into our life, or someone situation will happen, and we kind of lack some of those boundaries when we think, oh, well, we see this person or this, whatever it might be is different. So it's like, oh, well, maybe I need to reprogram and I need to think some of these boundaries because these boundaries are in place for safety. I don't need to be safe from this person, whatever it may be. I just think it's important that even if we do relax boundaries or even if we do, reframe some of our boundaries, it's always okay. Even if you're 10 years in a relationship, we change, we evolve as people. It's always okay to reestablish boundaries. It's always okay to be like, hey, this behavior worked for me before. It doesn't work for me anymore. And no matter what it does to that relationship or friendship or family dynamic, it's never going to do more damage to that than it will to you if you keep yourself in a place where your boundaries are being broken or it's internally damaging. So you always, and this is something that I'm guilty of, and probably goes back to not being good enough or whatever it is, but you always have to look at that and assess, like, you can never allow anything to do that much damage to yourself.
I mean, that's
and then you're
a
going to be
great
broken.
point. Great point.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is that as humans, what's one thing that we all crave, which is intimacy, right? Now, it's different for men and women, what that definition is. It's an abstract term, right? But we all do seek certain amount of spectrum. Comes back around.
Right.
But, we all do seek it in some way, shape, or form. And we're all guilty of dropping our boundaries at times based on levels of intimacy, especially with, and guys can be the same way. Guys can just be like, all right, well, listen, I don't want to have my guard up. And then all of a sudden it can actually affect the attractiveness of his partner. That's a big thing now too. It's like, guys, like, you can't be Mr. Vulnerable to your lady. You can't be Mr. like, I'm sad, I'm vulnerable.
From a woman,
to
you
your
can be to a certain extent. And it's just like, sorry, I didn't put you on. No, I just want to say, it's just like, I wouldn't expect my man to deal with me complaining day in, day out and being upset day in, day out. But there are times, y'all are human. Y'all are allowed to have a bad day. Y'all are allowed, and sometimes y'all are going to have a bad day. And I'm sorry, it's going to be on me to be like, even if I had a bad day, to put that away, to allow you space to get through that and figure that out.
And there's going to always be levels, right? I mean, it's the old thought of like hot water heater. Every once in a while, like, you got to let the steam out, right? So I agree with that. The fact that there are times, there are outlets. And whether or not there are healthy outlets or not, I believe that a man can have other healthy outlets that don't necessarily have to be his intimate relationship. That's all I'm saying. So however he chooses to be able to do that, because that can affect his intimate relationship and the way his wife sees him. That's all I'm saying.
No, that's
so, and if we can identify when we're lowering our expectations, where we're letting down our boundaries, and then just like you said, it's in our right as people that self-talk ourselves and be like, listen, I am this, I am this, I am this, versus unfortunately what our family is programmed into us. Then we can say, this type of person doesn't accept this type of behavior. And if I can communicate that in a healthy way, and that person doesn't accept where I am or who I am, then you know what? I can take that from a healthy perspective and exit stage left. The challenge is whether or not we've been programmed differently to think that we're not good enough to have all that the world has for us, right? So that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest challenge. Yeah. So then we start to accept things that we wouldn't necessarily accept, right? If someone, and this could be across anything, this could be in the business world, for sure, right? This could be in the business world where someone is taught that, we're not that kind of people. That's not
worth that much.
You're not an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Your services shouldn't cost that much. I can get it on Fiverr for this.
Or even being able to get to the point of even trying and going to do something on their own, right? Because their parents kind of, could have programmed them into thinking that. And that's why it's so important for the tribe that we surround ourselves with. And I'll share the book with you guys too. I mean, it's fascinating from that perspective of how much our self-talk really molds that. Because when do we get to the point of discernment? When do we get to the point of maturity, even though I don't like using that word because I just think it's an odd word to use. But when do we get to that point where we say to ourselves, okay, I have a powerful computer, but all I'm using is the calculator function of playing solitaire.
True.
Right? And that dates us a little bit too, to play solitaire on a computer, right?
Yeah.
But, it's like if you have this powerful computer and, you're playing Tetris or solitaire because of the programming that's in the computer. And then what could end up happening is that your operating system is off. So even if you put in a certain amount of inputs, you're not getting the results that somebody else would get because your operating system is off. And then all of a sudden you keep getting the same results and you're saying, why? I keep changing the inputs, your operating system, right? So that's the key, is the operating system. And that's something that I've been working on for the last couple of years. Like, no, it's about reprogramming my operating system. If I'm going to keep looking at the results that the computer is spitting out and saying, I've seen other computers do more, I've seen other computers, create more, how come I'm not? Operating system.
That was interesting. I think critically on this sometimes, just because I think naturally, just my brain is like goes into problem solving mode immediately. Vast array of topics. So I think about this and I'm just like, hey, well, when is this established, right? We have the operating system and you have to figure these things out. When are we at our highest level of influence, right, as youngsters? Because it blows my mind. It doesn't matter if you're 30, you're 20, you're 50, you're 70, you're 90. They always take you back to a certain window of time. It's generally between the ages of like 3 to 12. And they keep you in that gap. Therapists will walk you back there, right? They walk us back because we don't know how to walk ourselves, right? It's that accountability piece. We have this jersey. No, I'm Chiefs.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, yeah, the Chiefs, their defense say sorry. They're like, no, we're Chiefs, right? You're defensive about this stuff. But then the therapist walk you on back, like, take the jersey off before you play the ball. Let's go back over here. And they talk about these things. It's like, I think I'm not a parent yet, and so I can't imagine how challenging it has to be. But if they would do a better job of inputting this information available for people before we raise children to understand the phases and the stages and how important it is in this window of time, right? Because this is going to create the adult. This is not just the 5-year-old who we're talking to who spilled the spaghetti. How you chastise that spaghetti spill is going to dictate how they talk to themselves at 55.
Of their life.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think it boils so far back to that of like, hey, it matters. That self-talk is established as a youngster when the brain is formulating and it's growing, and all of them different components and facets of the brain start to formulate and compose that voice. And so I think that critical voice comes from those moments, those youthful moments, when we're in the motion of learning and experimenting and being imaginative. How are we being directed and projected to at that moment? I think that dictates then how we turn around and project and direct ourselves later in life. And so then it brings you back to the point of fault versus responsibility, right? It's not your fault what happened to you, but as an adult now, it's your responsibility. And then it leads you to give a grace to those who brought you up, whether it's your parents or your siblings or your grandparents or whatever, foster, it doesn't matter. You give a grace because now you realize foundationally in the human kingdom, right, the animal kingdom, they're just supposed to get you to adulthood safely. You ain't, you know what I'm saying? But they can get you to an adult without you dying or the lions, tigers, and bears or the circumstance of life taking you out. Hey, they have done their job. You can give them a grade, but they graduated. They're no longer a student right now. And I think a lot of times we still want those influences to also then come and save us later in life, not understanding they passed the baton. It's on us now. But now it's so critical to not be so defensive to a fault to where we don't hold ourselves accountable for where we are as it just stands. Because once you can look at where you are and understand nothing is perfect, there's always a good, there's a bad. That's the contrast of life, right? Once you understand that, now you can start paying attention to the bad only if you learn to love the good. A lot of times you'll find it's an underlying rooting of like self-love and appreciation, because it prevents people from looking at their gaps because they don't really see how much they have that they gain. And so I think it even goes foundation of just acceptance. Accept who we are, accept what we are. Enjoy and love the components that make us us and unique. Enjoy that. Now turn around and say, I know it's a lot of mess in this closet. I got to deal with it. Then we can start to attack what's in that closet. But I think it starts with, it was a book too, I don't know the author, I don't know the official title, but it was something about the gap versus the game. I was having another conversation about this. I think when you're growing up and you're trying to steer somebody along, even as a coach, even as a trainer, we have to be careful not to only identify the gaps. And I think that's where foundationally, from a compassionate lens of our parents and how everything came up is, I think that they're trying to steer us the best way they can. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be with the perspective of always identifying the gap versus the game. And so if everything you do, you might feel not good enough because the parent is only highlighting the gaps. Right? Yeah, that was good, but you did a great job, but that was a good game, but hey, this is a good report card, but you know what I mean? And then that's how you formulate yourself as an adult later in life. You always just see the gaps, not only in yourself, but others, partners, relationships, your career. Like it goes vast. You know, that mentality. And it sounds like, you know, a lack of mentality, but honestly, you're really just trying to progress yourself. That's the only way you know how to do it. You don't really know how to positive reinforce. You don't really know how to do these things.
Celebrate small wins.
Celebrate small wins, but then we just repeat the same cycles on the children and on whoever is under our influence, right? We don't go back and fix it. And I think about, hey, at least our parents for sure, they didn't have access to all of these personality assessments, DNA examinations. Like they didn't know to know. And a lot of times now we have to say, okay, and be thankful that now we do have these resources at our fingertips, in our grasp to go and figure it out. So it's not just, hey man, you know, this sucks. It's like, no, but now there's a lot of tools to identify the outcome, right?
Completely.
What your outcome is for life.
Huge.
Wear that jersey if that's the outcome you want. If you want to live and die by that. If you don't, because that is going to come with the good and the bad components. With the way you rolling, if you don't want to continue to deal with the bad components for the next 5-10 years, that is the only and that's all you need to know as far as being motivated to make the change and not be maybe unhealthily attached to some behaviors or dynamics of your personality that get in the way in the workplace, get in the way with relationships, get in the way with intimate and non-intimate relationships, and just get in the way. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And once we say, man, this is getting in the way, I no longer want this to be
huge point
to identify.
Yeah. I mean, especially like you said, getting in the way. There was 3 solid points that were there. Number 1, access to different strategies. Mm-hmm. Access to strategies to what gets you to where you want to go. Even as you were talking about parenting and the fact of all the information that's out there, mm-hmm. It made me think of a metaphor, which is how many cookbooks right now exist in Barnes & Noble, and how many people know how to fucking cook, right? It's the same thought process. The information's out there, the skill set is out there, but at the end of the day, people are gonna, what are they gonna make? How many of us have parents, have family members that we know make the same 5 dishes, right or wrong? Right, you know exactly what to expect when you go to Thanksgiving.
Exactly. Right? I have to bring the mac and cheese because if I don't, we're not getting any mac and cheese.
Right. So it's the exact same thought process. They're going to go through to the same 5 programs that they're used to doing, the same 5 recipes, because chances are that's what was fed to them. Yeah. So they're feeding it to you, but now we're getting to the point of saying, well, you know what? We don't think this is the healthiest food for us to eat. So now the only thing we could do is have some grace, have some understanding. I can't get mad at my parents for feeding me those dishes. Those are the only ones they know how to make. Right. The only ones they know how to make. So and you know what? That's what they need. And that's what was fed to them. Right. But now when do we get to the point of saying thank you, but no thank you? I'm going to learn how to be a better chef so that when I feed my kids, they're going to eat differently. Right? So that's just the same metaphor around exactly what you said, which is, okay, now, how do we figure out how to be better chefs? One very critical way to say it, again, not coming from a person that's not a parent yet either, is, the capability of having a child is different than being a good parent. Absolutely. And I think that there's this huge, spectrum?
I think it's spectrum. I think that's the word.
Spectrum.
Oh, is this like Sesame Street?
Levels.
Spectrum.
Levels. And, it says about how good or bad a person is at that, right? So sort of like, well, this person is a good or bad chef. Like they know how to make popcorn, or they know how to make, a very complex meal. And I don't think there's enough people that once they get to that point, invest and say to themselves, wait a second, I'm about to get this job, so I'm going to become the best version of that, the best attorney I can be, the best doctor I can be, the best entrepreneur I can be. But how many people really take the parenting responsibility and say, I'm going to be the best parent I can be, and take it with the same amount of vigor, with the same amount of enthusiasm, with the same amount of ruthlessness even, mm-hmm. to say, I'm going to ingest everything possible to become the best parent, right? We see people do it at the gym all the time. You got one guy with this one little muscle, and he can focus on that. But then the question is that are you using that same intensity towards your career, towards making money, towards being a parent, right? Versus putting it into that one field. Again, not judging anybody, but sometimes what we can do is we can pick one thing and stay so laser focused on it that we're not well-rounded across all areas, right? When, that there could be an issue. And then there's another thing that you said where is us getting into the mindset of using the word reactiveness instead of defensiveness, right? Because I think we've been programmed to think being defensive is this horrible thing. I think being defensive is fine if you're defending yourself, if you're defending your family, you're defending your beliefs, you're defending people that you care about. I think it's a great thing. I think we need to start just inserting the word reactive and say to myself, damn, why was I reactive? Why was I reactive to what they said? Why did I allow that to make me be reactive? And I think because that then pushes into understanding. And sometimes when we see that and be like, well, wait a second, I was non-reactive for this, and this, but when someone hit here, I was reactive. What's here? Oh, it's a rib. So now you don't have a twisted ankle. You have a rib issue, right? But if you address it, you can address it. And that, I think, is going back to the reactivity of it. So again, in looking at, we can only eat the meals that our parents ate, and they know how to cook, right? And by no fault to theirs, are they trying to instill the best possible outcome for the lives of their children, right? We don't think there's many psychopaths in the world, maybe 0.01% of pure psychopaths in the world. But other than that, intention doesn't necessarily lead to the exact results a person is looking for, nor should it. I mean, not everyone has the intention. I don't think people have the intention. But what can end up happening is that when it comes to the way people feel any sense of power, and I've seen it a million times, and they have a way of projecting a sense of showing someone that they're wrong, and showing someone, which means that they're not right, and showing someone that there's something wrong. And that type of energy is a lot different than being playful versus someone that you're around, but they're doing it, but we grew up in that culture. And our culture is heavy with that. And then they want to say, oh, it's all right, I'm just busting your balls. I'm just doing this, I'm doing that. And the more I'm out of New York, the more I see how that's the crabs in a bucket. And when I go back there, I fall back into the crabs in a bucket energy, right? And I crawl back into the crabs in the bucket, and then I start jabbing back, and then I'm like, why am I so tired right now? Right? And I'm like, oh, because I went back to sparring when they're not even what I want to fight, and now I've just used up all this energy to spar with someone that has nothing that I want, but that's how they show affection, and that's how they show, because they think that's somehow going to make you. Now, when it comes to locker room guy stuff, I think that early age, and then one last thing about what you were saying, I think the age there is a 1 to 7. I think that's the age. I firmly believe that's when self-esteem is formed. Because I think this whole thing that we're talking about is around one thing. Not self-confidence, not motivation, not self-talk. I think the one thing that we're lacking, and the vast majority of people, 99.9% of the population lack, is high levels of self-esteem. Legitimate high levels of self-esteem. Not vanity, not arrogance, genuine high levels of self-esteem.
There's also self-love as well.
And I think self-love is a byproduct of self-esteem. Self-confidence, byproduct of self-esteem. All of these other selves are all byproducts of self-esteem. Holding yourself in high esteem is all within that same. But if you don't have that, all the other stuff is masks. Anyone that thinks Kanye has high self-esteem, absolutely not. All that was a mask. That was a mask to hide low self-esteem, to then put out a front of what many deemed as arrogance, which was a mask, right? And you can also see, what that looks like, but it was what was needed. Because again, I had a lot of those same things when I was young. I had on this mask with Machi, but it really is combating something else. But it's like, hey, you're not taking a shot at me, you're taking a shot at Machi. You know what I mean? But the same could be said when Kobe was on the court, he was Black Mamba. So you're not coming from Kobe, you're coming from Black Mamba. So there is a lot of power there behind this alter ego idea of things. Tiger has the same thing. When Tiger went to Tiger mode, that was it. You couldn't stop him, he would kill you. And I think there's a lot to be said there. So 0 to 7, self-esteem, the way you create that in a child, the way you program that into what they can and can't accept, and the way you teach the world how it can and can't treat you, without becoming reactive, but at the same time becoming defensive when you have to. Right? I don't want to be around someone. I gotta protect my wife and my kids. I don't want to get defensive. Yeah, I don't want to get defensive. I don't want them to think I'm getting defensive. No, don't speak to my wife that way. Don't speak to my kids that way. Oh, why are you getting defensive? Because you're acting in a way that is causing me to respond to you by defending my family, right? As long as you get to that point of understanding reactivity, that I think is the one thing that if you can harness your reactivity, then you can go a lot further. And I tell you, every time I go back to New York, I turn back into that reactive energy because there's so much going on. You have to be reactive to the environment around you.
One core tenet I taught Jay on, and if I ever have more kids, it'll be the core tenet for them as well. Like, we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it and how we choose to let it affect us. And it doesn't matter what that is in life. We can't control if we get cancer. We can control it, well, in some cases.
Right.
Right?
Well,
If we're smoking every day, we get cancer.
It goes back to respond.
Right.
How do we respond?
You can either let it kill you, or you can fight it.
How do we respond?
Right. Or you can go down fighting. And so I've always told them that, like, you know, and I think it kind of just, you know, a lot of people, I think especially nowadays, have that victim mentality. And I think you have to take accountability for everything in your life. Even if you, and we've all been through shitty things that we did not bring on ourselves. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to look at those situations and say, well, X, Y, and Z is why this happened, whether I intended for it to or not. X, Y, and Z is why this happened. And you can either, like I said, no matter how negative it is, you control how you react to it, and you let it defeat you, or you beat it, and you become greater for it. And so, no matter what happens with Jaylon, it's like, dude, okay, that sucks. What are you gonna do now? How are you gonna move on from it, and let that, you know, build your life and who you are.
You hit the nail right on the head, and it goes back to how are you going to respond? How are you going to respond? How do I want to respond? How are you going to respond? And then when you have the confidence to be able to look at him and to be able to understand when the parent becomes almost a friend or an ally versus an authority figure. But I know that that's a challenge that a lot of my families had. I've had with my own parents. Like, how do you get to that point of, like the movie 300, when he comes back after having killed the wolf? It's like, okay, now you can't speak to him like he's little Leo. You know, he's not little Leo anymore.
Right.
He's Leonidas.
Right.
You know, he's Alexander at that point. You know what I'm saying? Like, when do you get to that point of treating different? And a lot of it does have to do with how we're treated by our family, by our friends, by the world, that can create this sense of weakness or power. So in being a parent, if you can look at him in the face and not say, oh, okay, what are you gonna do? Anything as simple as that.
Right.
The way, that's why tone is so important.
Right.
That's why I respond to the way people speak to me. Because I'm like, why are you speaking to me like I'm fucking stupid?
Right,
Like, what am I missing? You know what I mean? Like,
well, and I think even with that, like, you know, dictating how we're gonna react to stuff, at the end of the day, like, we've been into these situations where people have had power over us. All of us have at some point. And if we continue to react in a negative manner to that, or if we continue to be a victim to that, all we're doing is letting that person continue to win. It could be 20 years later, that person still has control over
and
your
how many
life.
people still have that?
Yeah.
1,000%.
Right. Like, I would not allow anyone else to have control over my life. Like, I've, you know, been through too much in life that has derailed me. I'm not living it anymore. And it's a matter of, like, I have to take accountability for that. If I don't, then I'm just being a victim.
And then letting go. Remember the book Letting Go that we spoke about?
Yeah, I think ownership.
That's huge.
Big time. I think ownership is another one to throw in there as far as, like, also taking accountability, right? Taking that onus to do it, but then taking the ownership to know, like, your responsibility to do it. It's not just a byproduct, right?
Nobody owes you shit.
It's on you now. You have to do it.
Right.
And you know, looking at a couple of things, just the word trigger just brings up that we're talking about reaction. Foundationally, trigger might be what was triggered inside and why. You know, we talk about neutrality a lot of times as part of that book, Letting Go, Map of Consciousness. But you want to respond in the most ideal way, right, with the most probable outcome from a state of neutrality, right? Not being in emotion, right? We hear all the time, don't respond emotionally. And it just makes me think critically on that, like, okay, if neutrality's here, okay, and somebody says something to you, people are talking, and life is doing what it does, it's life, and those moments that something is sparked or triggered on the inside based on what life is doing, now it's gonna move that needle. Right? It's gonna move it up, down, right, and I think that is a trigger point, is when what was sparked. Something happened, but it can happen to 10 different people, and each person is going to react a little bit different, depending on what was triggered. And I think it's important to then understand, okay, we don't always have to respond once we feel. It's not the ownership of the other person to know what we're going on in here. And a lot of times I think we're in a culture of projecting that ownership. You triggered me. You need to fix it. Versus you just said XYZ. You could have said that to 10 people.
Yeah.
But because you said it to me, now we got confrontation. We got heat. You know what I mean? Because now I don't know how to handle this up in here. So I think it's almost being reactive to the feeling that was drummed up inside of you from somebody else. And that's that giving that power away. The power of the person that they're just behaving, doing what they're going to do anyways. Because it's Saturday, they're going to have the same Saturday. You happen to be in their environment, they do something to you, it stirred up something in you, and now it's important to have a strong ability to understand how to discern what that is. Okay, what's my outcome? I don't want confrontation, so I need to chew on this. I know that I only feel this way because I can't handle that, right? And just having that awareness to understand at that foundational level what's going on. And I know when bad things happen to me, I'm always at a different point. There's a point that you were making. What can I learn? I can't change negative outcomes. To your point about Jaylon, just and influencing him to adopt that behavior of looking at like, how can you respond? Immediately go to the response. You can't change what happened, but how can you respond? And for me, bad stuff happens. Like, what can I learn from this? What can I learn? Because there's no other beneficial action to take. Anything outside of the lesson from a negative happenstance or a happening that happens in life is a waste of time. It's not going to get you further or closer to any type of positive outcome. And so if you get in a car accident, this happens to you, that happens to you, this happens to you. What can I learn? Even the injury, what can I learn? What can I learn? Not to say that taking a moment to mourn or be upset or sad about it is not human. But I know that is not going to get me closer to anything positive.
You can't sit in it.
Right. You can't sit in it. So when bad things happen, I spill this coffee, what can I learn? Be more careful. When you start talking, you start not paying attention. What can you learn, right? And then that brings me to my final point I'm going to make is about, they did a study on the great athletes. I think you spoke about this before. And they were identifying what makes the greats amongst the greats. Right? Everybody's not great, right? But when you talk about the highest professional level of sports or anything, right, you have people that are there. People that are in that world are great. But now what makes the Michael Jordans and LeBron Jameses, right, of the world, with the Tom Brady's, what makes them exceptional amongst people who are already exceptional above the average? And they say that the small critical difference is what they say to themselves after they make a mistake. They said that little bitty difference is what gives them that extra critical edge over their opponents. Because everybody is in the gym practicing 1,000 hours a week. Everybody has perfected their craft. But in the moment of adversity, the one who says, we got this, we'll get it next time, keep going, and takes that mentality of, what can I learn from that missed shot? What did I do? Did I not set my feet? Did I not turn my hand? Did I not breathe? Like, what did I do, right? Because now on the go, you can learn and improve and immediately apply if you're in the mentality of being optimistic of, hey man, this doesn't define me, right? This is just something that happened. What can I learn from it to apply it to my game so that now I can continue to get better, better, better? That's how you have a bad game in a strong fourth quarter and win the championship. You know what I mean? That's how you have horrible showing, but then you show up in the most critical moment, poised, and you deliver that blow, you deliver that pass, you deliver that scoring element that then gets you over that moment, right? But didn't say the bad things didn't happen. They did, but you responded, you recovered so well that now that defines you as a champion. Completely. And I think that's a hell of a point.
You hit the nail on the head. And when you say, like, how do you respond to it? How did you respond? And the other thing is sometimes they'll say it's just a short memory. Yeah. Having the short memory of, like, missing the shot, doing this, they'll say, what do I need to learn? What do I need to learn? But they forget about it. And then even to what you were saying before, is that how many of us have used something that happened 20 years ago that we're still holding on to? Yeah. Right? So it's that long memory of things that happened to us, for us, by us. Yeah. Let's not get the bias part of it out of it. Because there's a lot of people out there that love to talk about the happened to them and happened, but a lot of people don't like to feel comfortable talking about what happened because of them. Right. It's a very uncomfortable place to be, for them to be able to actually take that level of ownership and that level of accountability, to be able to say, well, wait a second, something's off a little bit. Now I need to make an adjustment. If I want to be great, if you don't want to be great, keep going and doing what you want to do. If you want to be great, if your outcome, if you want to be around the top 10%ers, how are they thinking? How are they responding? What are they using with the outside information that they have access to be able to make themselves better at any given point? And not taking things personal, as sometimes people say. But I think a lot of that has to do with our personal experiences, right? When I see someone taking something personal, I think it's about their personal experiences that have caused them to do that. And we live in a culture right now that loves playing the V word, which is victim. You know, we live in a huge victim culture, And again, there's a certain amount of dopamine that somebody gets when they're able to say what happened to them, right? Because they get sympathy. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for empathy. They're looking for sympathy.
Reflecting that ownership on myself.
Correct. Completely. And what it does, it gives them a hit of sympathy. And when they get that little hit of sympathy, they're like, oh, wow, that feels better. That takes away from the fact of what happened. It could have been that something did happen to you, but what part did we play in that situation? We play a part in every situation. You're like, oh, I got into a car accident. What part did you play in that situation? There has to be something.
Even if you just decided to drive the car that day, like you were hit by a drunk driver.
I mean, look,
you drove the car that day.
There has to be some level of accountability in every single thing that we do. How do we respond? How do we have a short memory in our errors or our mistakes and our misses, right? Then we can say, hey, it's not, it's about just failing at a couple things. And then who do we surround ourselves with to continue with the self-talk that are also talking about that themselves, that are also at that point of being around other people that want to positive talk about each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me is the healthier side of it. You know,
and I think it's key is having that balance, because I think it is very easy when you are very accountable and when you do take a lot of ownership, it is very easy then to go into that negative self-talk space. And so you have to figure out that balance, and you have to
especially if that's how you're programmed based on what your family has told you.
Right.
And they will, oh, I'm just playing, that's just how we are.
Right.
Like, it's just terrible programming. I see it all the time. And when you see the way they talk to the kids, oh, well, look at this one, or he's always doing that, like he can't do nothing right. Oh, we just playing with you. You're taking it personal. Like, we're just playing with you. No, you're programming those kids. But it's the truth.
Right.
You're programming these kids because you're meant to think that this person loves you. If this person loves you and they treat you this way, you're now associating love with that behavior. Right. And that becomes something you stick with the rest of your life. Right. So what ends up happening is 1,000, women out there. Everything goes down to how their father treated them. That's it. If you got good love from your father, that's what you associate with love. If you got bad treatment, you associate bad treatment with love. And now all of a sudden, like, well, why do I accept this bad treatment from? Because you're accepting that as love.
That's all you know.
That's all you know. And that was what was programmed into you. Because you were told this person loves you the most in the world. Now I'm going to identify how they treat me. Now I'm going to associate the person that loves me most in the world with that behavior. That's it. It's really that simple. Until we reprogram ourselves to say what we will and won't accept. It's the truth. Until what we can, will and won't accept, to say, look, I won't accept that. And forgive our parents for making the same 5 damn meals that they were served. And say, you know what? I don't want to eat that. And I'm not going to eat that. And you know what? I'd actually rather fast and just shut the fuck up and not speak to anybody if I have to. Listen, Jesus did it for 40 days. Yeah. Look, I mean, that's part of why I moved out here to Texas. I'm like, I just need to completely get away, right? Yeah. And that's what it has to be, this cavernous period.
Different.
You know
I don't
what I mean?
think there's a broader difference between New York and California than Texas. On the political spectrum, on the economic spectrum, like, I just don't think there's not a broader difference. If you want to get away from what you know in New York, where else are you going? Maybe Idaho. That would be
part of it is also submerging yourself in differences. Yeah. Submerging yourself in cultures, right? Being around people that have different perspectives as you, and saying like, well, wait a second, is it that I can't handle it? Or is it that, there's something about that boiling water that I'm afraid to get into? Or have you really just gotten to the point of making yourself into enough of a man that you're like, I can cold plunge right now. You want to go? Let's go. Right. Versus I put my toe in the water and go run screaming the other way. But that's true. You know what I mean? But like that's the metaphor of it, right? So it's like, but if I can come here or if I can go somewhere, that's a true resilience of it, right? Like Jesus had to go into the wilderness and get tested by the devil. Hardcore. Be like, I'll give you all the food that you want. I'll give you everything that you need. Just listen to me. Just do what I need you to do. And he was like, you know what? I'm good because you know what? There's a saying I heard the other day, which I love. It says, the road to hell feels like heaven, and the road to heaven feels like hell.
Yeah.
Oof. That's a one. That's a good one.
and it was around a little bit around, I forgot who they were talking about, but I mean, I think it was Conor McGregor, and how it was like the road to, right?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
You keep diving on that one. That's a good one.
Because it was like the road to hell of training,
Yeah.
got him to heaven, and then he started doing drugs and all this other stuff, and he had some things that were there, and it was like the road to heaven looks like hell, the road to hell looks like heaven, and it's interesting, right? And it's like, man, that's interesting. Now it's like, all right, well, what do we need to do to put ourselves through the disciplines of the working out, of the learning how to cook, cooking the right food, only serving those around us with the food that we know is healthiest. No matter how it might feel to give your kid a Pop-Tart, to say, my kid's not eating Pop-Tarts. My kid is going to eat these pasture-raised eggs.
Deal with it.
And I need to drive across town to get these pasture-raised eggs, but I will. Because my kid is only going to eat pasture-raised eggs. And then what do I need to do to take that ownership and responsibility to say, my kid's not going to go to that school because all they do is serve Pop-Tarts. And no matter how much I focus on his breakfast and his dinner, if for lunch he's having Pop-Tarts, a lot of it is going to waste. So I'm not saying it's easy, but what I'm saying is that these are the things that I want to do when I have a family, to take all the ownership as much as possible to feed my family only what my job is to serve. My job is to serve my family. Hopefully you guys, my friends, feel that as well. Of like, I serve up good. You know what I mean? And that to me is when you really have become a great chef. When you eat what you're cooking, but you also serve what you're cooking. There's a lot of people out there that want to eat what they want to say that they're cooking, but then they don't serve it up. And you're like, why are you serving up that way? You're like, are you really eating this way?
Yeah.
I don't know if you are, because I think you might be full of shit. Because you're serving this kind of behavior, but it's just like, is this something that you're not telling us? But that's, to me, that most powerful statement is like, listen, man, the road to hell looks like heaven.